I'm 27 and about a year ago, I bought a house in the city. It's a nice three-bedroom place, not a mansion, but definitely comfortable. I work in cybersecurity, make a solid income, and figured it was time to invest in something long-term. My parents, Karen and Mike, are both retired school counselors. They had been living in a quiet suburban area, but after retirement, they decided they wanted to move closer to the city for a more active lifestyle. It made sense. They were bored in the suburbs, and I had space. So, we worked out an arrangement. They'd move in with me, and I'd handle the mortgage and expenses since I was in a financial position to do so. They were my parents, after all, and they'd done plenty for me growing up. The setup was simple. I took the master bedroom. It had an ensuite bathroom and a walk-in closet. And let's be honest, if you're paying the mortgage, that's a fair deal. The second bedroom became my home office since I work remotely most of the time. The third bedroom was set aside as a guest room, just in case we had visitors. Everyone seemed happy with the arrangement, and for the first few months, things ran smoothly. My parents settled into their routine. My mom spent her mornings gardening in the tiny backyard, and my dad enjoyed binging old Western movies in the living room. I focused on work, handled the bills, and kept the fridge stocked. It wasn't perfect, no living arrangement ever is, but it worked. Then, about 6 months in, my mom casually mentioned something over breakfast. You know, your brother Brian and his wife Anna have been thinking about moving here. Things haven't been great for them back in their town, and Anna's pregnant now. Brian is 2 years older than me. He's always been the golden child, the one who somehow skated through life despite making questionable choices. He and Anna have been together for a few years, and while she's generally nice enough, she has this habit of acting like the world owes her something. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I assumed they'd get a little apartment somewhere nearby. But a week later, my mom sat me down in the living room and said, "We've invited Brian and Anna to stay here for a while, just until they get back on their feet." That phrasing, "just for a while," should have been my first red flag. But I was caught off guard and just nodded along, figuring it wouldn't be a big deal. I didn't realize then that this wasn't a casual suggestion. It was already a done deal. The following weekend, Brian and Anna showed up with 4 suitcases, a couple of boxes, and the air of people who had no intention of leaving anytime soon. They moved into the guest room, and at first, I tried to stay optimistic. It's family, right? How bad could it be? It didn't take long for the cracks to show. Anna immediately started making little comments, always said with a sweet smile, like butter wouldn't melt in her mouth. "Wow, this house must be so hard for you to manage all by yourself," or, "Once the baby comes, we'll definitely need some extra space for all the baby stuff." I brushed it off at first. I told myself they were just adjusting to a new environment. But then little things started piling up. Groceries I just bought disappeared almost overnight. My energy bills shot up because Anna insisted on keeping every light and the AC running 24/7. And Brian, well, he just hung around the house all day, doing nothing. One night, after I wrapped up a particularly grueling day of work, Brian and Anna cornered me in the kitchen. They were doing that weird thing where they tried to act casual, but you could tell they'd been rehearsing this conversation. "So, we've been thinking," Anna started, her hand resting protectively over her baby bump. "It might make more sense for us to have the master bedroom." I stared at her, waiting for her to laugh or say she was joking. She didn't. "The baby's going to need space," Brian added, nodding like he was saying something perfectly reasonable. "And the master has the private bathroom and the walk-in closet. It just makes sense." I was stunned. I pay for this house. I pay for the groceries. I keep the lights on. And here they were, asking me to give up my own bedroom because they wanted more space for their hypothetical baby furniture. I kept my voice calm. "Why don't you just stay in the guest room? It's plenty big." Anna's smile faltered. "But there's no walk-in closet in there. And the bathroom's so far down the hall." "Well," I said, trying not to snap, "then maybe you should start looking for an apartment that has those things." Brian looked like he couldn't believe I was standing my ground. Anna's face went red, and she let out this annoyed little sigh before storming back to the guest room. The next couple of days were tense. I could feel them avoiding me, whispering to each other when I walked into the room. My mom noticed the awkward vibe and tried to smooth things over, but she wasn't exactly neutral. Every time she spoke to me, It felt like she was subtly trying to guilt me into giving in. A few days later, I came home after running errands and noticed something odd. My office door was ajar, and my monitor was missing. My stomach dropped as I hurried upstairs. When I got to my bedroom, I stopped dead in the doorway. Anna was standing in the middle of my room, surrounded by half-packed boxes and piles of my clothes. She didn't even look surprised to see me. "Oh, hey. Your mom said we could go ahead and start moving our stuff in here." I couldn't even process what I was seeing. "Are you serious? You're actually doing this?" She blinked at me, like I was the one being unreasonable. "We need the space, Alex. The baby is coming soon." I turned on my heel, stormed downstairs, and called my mom. When she picked up, I didn't even give her a chance to say hello. "Did you tell Brian and Anna they could move into my room?" There was a long pause before she said, "Well, honey, they do need the space." That was it. That was the moment I realized there was no reasoning with them. I wasn't about to be pushed out of my own bedroom, in my own house, just because my brother and his wife decided they were entitled to it. I walked back upstairs, looked Anna straight in the eye, and said, "Get your stuff out of my room. Now." Anna stared at me like I just slapped her across the face. Her hand instinctively went to her belly, like she was trying to shield herself from my words. "Alex, you don't have to be so aggressive about it," she said, her voice trembling just enough to make it sound like she was on the verge of tears. "I wasn't having it. This isn't aggression, Anna. This is me setting a boundary in my house, in my room, that I pay for. You don't belong in here. Get your stuff out now." She didn't move. Instead, she crossed her arms over her chest and stared me down, her chin tilted up defiantly. "Your mom said it was fine," she repeated, like that was supposed to carry any weight. I couldn't help but laugh, bitter and humorless. My mom doesn't own this house. She doesn't pay for it. Her opinion doesn't override mine when it comes to my own home. You and Brian are guests here, and you're crossing a line. Before she could reply, Brian appeared in the doorway, his brows furrowed and fists clenched at his sides. "What's going on?" he demanded, like he'd walked into a crime scene. "What's going on?" I said, turning to him. "Is that your wife decided to start moving my stuff out of my bedroom because Mom said it was fine." Newsflash, Brian. Mom doesn't make the rules here, I do. Brian looked at Anna, who gave him this wide-eyed, helpless look that I'm sure she thought made her look innocent. "Alex, come on, man," he said, his voice softer now, like he was trying to reason with me. "We're family. It's not like we're strangers. We just need a little more space, and you've got the office. You don't even need 2 rooms." I felt my jaw tighten. "Don't tell me what I do or don't need, Brian. You and Anna are already living here rent-free. You eat the food I buy, use the utilities I pay for, and now you think you're entitled to my bedroom because you need more space? Are you kidding me?" Anna piped up again, her voice sharper now. "This isn't about entitlement, Alex. It's about practicality. A baby needs space. A baby needs a bathroom nearby for nighttime changes and then go find an apartment with all those things." I snapped, cutting her off. "Because you're not getting my room. End of discussion." I turned and walked out before either of them could argue further. I could hear Anna muttering something to Brian as I went back to my office and slammed the door behind me. I sat down in my chair, my hands shaking with frustration. My heart was racing, and my head was spinning with anger. 15 minutes later, there was a knock at my office door. I took a deep breath before opening it, half expecting to see Brian or Anna again. Instead, it was my mom, Karen, with that familiar mix of forced calm and thinly veiled disappointment on her face. "Alex, honey, can we talk?" she said softly. I stepped aside to let her in, folding my arms across my chest as she sat down in the chair across from me. She sighed, staring at her hands for a moment before speaking. "I didn't think it would upset you this much," she said finally. I let out a dry laugh. "You didn't think me walking into my room and finding Anna packing up my stuff would upset me? Seriously?" "Alex, they're struggling," she said, her voice taking on that pleading, maternal edge she always used when she wanted me to bend. "They don't have anywhere else to go, and with the baby coming—" I held up a hand to stop her. "Mom, stop. You keep saying they're struggling, but they're not trying to fix their situation. They're just camping out here, eating my food, and demanding more from me. And you let them. You're enabling them. Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel guilty. Not this time. We're family, Alex. We're supposed to support each other. No, I said firmly. We're supposed to respect each other. Support goes both ways, Mom. I've been supporting all of you, financially, emotionally, and in every other way. But none of you are respecting me or my boundaries. She nodded slowly, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I thought you'd understand. I sighed and rubbed my temples, trying to stay calm. I do understand. I understand that Brian and Anna made a mess of their lives, and now you're trying to clean it up for them. But you can't do that at my expense. I'm not giving up my room. That's final. She didn't say anything else. She just nodded and left the room quietly, closing the door behind her. For the next 2 days, the tension in the house was suffocating. Brian and Anna stayed mostly in the guest room, only emerging to eat or whisper to my parents in hushed tones. My dad, Mike, stayed completely out of it. He barely spoke to me, barely made eye contact. On the 3rd day, while I was working in my office, I heard someone messing around in the kitchen. When I went out to see what was happening, I found Brian unloading a box of baby supplies onto the dining table: diapers, baby clothes, bottles, and even a crib. What's all this? I asked, leaning against the doorway. Brian didn't even look up. Anna's nesting, he said casually, as if that explained anything. In my dining room? I shot back. Are you serious? He sighed, finally turning to face me. Alex, we're just trying to get ready. You don't get it because you don't have kids, but this stuff takes space. No, Brian, I said, taking a step closer. You don't get it. This isn't your house. This isn't your space. You and Anna are guests here, and you're treating me like some kind of afterthought. Why are you being such an asshole about this? He snapped, throwing his hands in the air. We're family, Alex. I felt something in me snap. Stop saying that like it's a magic word that excuses everything you're doing. Family doesn't mean you get to walk all over me. Family doesn't mean you get to act entitled to things you didn't earn. Anna walked into the kitchen at that exact moment, carrying another armful of baby supplies. She froze, her eyes darting between me and Brian. I pointed to both of them. I've had enough. You have 2 choices. Stay in the guest room and stop overstepping, or pack your things and get out. But either way, you're not taking over my bedroom, and you're not turning my house into your personal storage unit. Anna's lips started trembling as Brian glared at me. Neither of them said anything. I turned and walked out, my head pounding, my fists clenched. I was done playing nice. If they wanted to stay here, they were going to have to follow my rules. Otherwise, they could find somewhere else to play house. The day after that explosive argument in the kitchen, the house was eerily quiet. Too quiet. It felt like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for someone to make the next move. I stayed in my office most of the day, headphones on, trying to focus on work, but every little creak or muffled voice in the hallway made my shoulders tense. I knew this wasn't over. People like Brian and Anna don't just back down. They regroup, they strategize, and then they double down. Around lunchtime, I walked into the kitchen to grab something to eat. The fridge was practically empty. I'd just gone grocery shopping 2 days ago, and now there was barely anything left. Half a gallon of milk, a few eggs, and some wilted lettuce. That's it. I checked the pantry, same story. Cereal boxes with crumbs, empty snack wrappers stuffed back into the box like they were going to magically refill themselves. I wasn't even mad at this point. I was just exhausted. I stood there, staring into the empty fridge, trying to remind myself that these were grown adults I was dealing with, not teenagers raiding the pantry after school. I grabbed the last 2 eggs and started frying them. As I stood over the stove, I heard voices drifting from the living room. Not fair, Brian. He's being completely unreasonable. That was Anna. Her voice had that sharp edge she used when she thought she was being wronged. I know, babe, but what do you want me to do? He's not listening to Mom either. Brian's voice was low, frustrated. I rolled my eyes and kept cooking. They were talking like I was some evil landlord instead of their brother, and the person keeping a roof over their heads. When I sat down to eat, Anna walked into the kitchen. She didn't even pretend to be casual about it. Arms crossed, one eyebrow raised, She planted herself in front of me like she was about to deliver some grand speech. Alex, we need to talk. I didn't even look up from my plate. We've talked already, Anna. No, you talked. You made your demands and stormed off. That's not a conversation. I sighed, put my fork down, and leaned back in my chair. Fine. Talk. She hesitated for a second, like she wasn't expecting me to actually give her the floor. We're family, Alex. I don't understand why you're being so cold about this. We're just asking for a little consideration. I'm pregnant, we're stressed, and instead of helping us, you're acting like we're strangers. Anna, I said as calmly as I could manage, you're not asking for consideration. You're demanding I give up my space, my comfort, and my peace of mind in my own house. I've already given you both a roof over your heads, free food, and zero financial responsibility. How much more do you expect me to give? She opened her mouth to reply, but I kept going. And don't play the pregnancy card with me again. I get it, it's hard, it's stressful, but being pregnant doesn't give you a free pass to act entitled to things that aren't yours. Her mouth snapped shut. For a second, she just stared at me, blinking rapidly, like she couldn't believe I was talking to her that way. Then she turned on her heel and stormed out of the kitchen. About 10 minutes later, my mom knocked on my office door. I knew it was coming. It was always the same cycle. Anna complains to Brian, Brian complains to Mom, and then Mom comes to me, pleading for me to be reasonable. I opened the door, and sure enough, there she was, wringing her hands and looking like she'd aged 5 years overnight. Alex, honey, can we please sit down and talk about this? Mom, I already said everything I needed to say. They're guests here, and they're acting like they own the place. I'm done having this argument. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. They're under a lot of stress, Alex. You have to understand that. Mom, I'm under a lot of stress. I'm working full-time to pay for this house, groceries, bills, everything. And on top of that, I have to deal with 2 adults who refuse to respect boundaries. Why are you always on their side? She flinched at that, like I'd physically struck her. I'm not on anyone's side. I'm just trying to keep the peace. Well, news flash, Mom, there is no peace. Not as long as they keep pushing and you keep enabling them. She sighed deeply, her shoulders slumping like she was carrying the weight of the world. I don't want this to break our family apart. It's already broken, Mom, I said quietly, because you keep asking me to compromise, but you've never once asked them to respect me or this house. She didn't have a response to that. She just nodded slowly and walked out of the room. That night, Brian and Anna decided to escalate things. I walked into the living room after finishing up some work, only to find the entire space rearranged. My parents' couch had been pushed to the corner, my coffee table was shoved up against the wall, and in the middle of the room was a half-assembled crib. I stood there for a long moment, just staring at it. Brian was on his knees with an Allen wrench, and Anna was sitting on the couch with one hand on her belly and the other scrolling through her phone. What is this? I finally asked. Anna looked up, her face calm and composed. We need the space for the baby, Alex. There's no room in the guest room. Are you serious right now? I said, my voice rising. You're turning my living room into a nursery without even asking me? Brian stood up, the wrench still in his hand. We didn't think you'd mind. It's not like you spend much time in here anyway. That's not the point. I snapped. You don't get to make decisions like this without talking to me first. This isn't your house. Anna's voice cut in, sharp and defensive. Well, if you'd just let us have the master bedroom, we wouldn't have to do this. And there it was. The truth laid bare. This wasn't about space, or practicality, or the baby. This was about them not getting what they wanted and trying to take it anyway. I pointed at the crib. Get this out of here. Right now. I'm done with the passive-aggressive games, the manipulation, and the guilt trips. If you can't respect me or this house, then you're not welcome here anymore. Anna's face turned red, and Brian looked like he was about to argue, but I didn't give him the chance. I turned around, walked back to my office, and slammed the door behind me. I sat down at my desk, heart pounding in my chest, hands shaking with adrenaline. This wasn't going to end quietly. I knew that now. But one thing was crystal clear. They had to go. The morning after the living room nursery incident, I woke up to the sound of hushed arguing downstairs. I could hear Anna's sharp voice cutting through the muffled hum of Brian's deeper tone, and somewhere in the middle of it, my mom's softer, pleading voice trying to smooth things over. I stayed in bed for a moment, staring at the ceiling, mentally preparing myself to walk into whatever fresh hell awaited me downstairs. When I finally made my way to the kitchen, the three of them were sitting at the dining table. Brian had his arms crossed, staring at a spot on the floor. Anna was looking out the window with a sour expression, and my mom was clutching a coffee mug like it was the only thing holding her together. They all fell silent when they noticed me walk in. "Good morning," I said flatly, opening the fridge only to be greeted by, once again, empty shelves. Did anyone bother to leave food for the guy who actually pays for it? Or are we just raiding the fridge now without limits? Anna sighed loudly, her back still to me. "Oh my God, Alex. Are you going to make everything about money? We get it. You pay the bills. You don't have to remind us every 5 minutes." I slammed the fridge door shut and turned to face them. "You mean the bills none of you contribute to? The food none of you help buy? The mortgage none of you help pay?" "Yeah, Anna, I'm going to remind you, because somehow, despite doing everything around here, I'm still the bad guy in your eyes." Brian shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but Anna didn't flinch. She just glared at me like I was being unreasonable for not letting them completely take over my life. My mom looked like she was about to cry again, and I felt a familiar wave of exhaustion wash over me. I grabbed my keys and walked toward the door. "I'm going grocery shopping, and when I get back, I expect that crib out of my living room." "I'm not asking. I'm telling you." When I returned an hour later, bags of groceries in hand, the crib was still there. Not only that, but it had been fully assembled, complete with baby blankets and a mobile hanging over it. Anna was sitting on the couch scrolling through her phone, and Brian was in the kitchen making a sandwich, with ingredients I had just bought. "Are you serious right now?" I said, dropping the bags onto the counter with a loud thud. "I gave you one simple instruction, and you couldn't even do that?" Anna didn't even look up from her phone. "We're not moving it, Alex. The baby needs a space, and we've already set it up. You're just going to have to deal with it." Brian turned to me with an annoyed expression. "Why are you being so dramatic about this? It's just a crib. You're acting like we bulldozed your office or something." I felt something snap inside me. This wasn't about the crib anymore. It wasn't even about the groceries or the bedroom or the endless passive-aggressive comments. This was about respect, or, more accurately, the complete lack of it. "No," I said firmly. "I'm done. You've ignored every boundary I've set. You've treated me like some kind of villain because I won't let you walk all over me. I've been more than generous, but this is the last straw." Anna finally looked up, her expression incredulous. "Are you actually kicking us out? Me? A pregnant woman? Are you serious right now?" "Yes, Anna. I am serious. Pack your things. You have until tomorrow to leave." Brian slammed his sandwich down on the counter. "You're unbelievable, Alex. You're throwing your own family out over a crib? Do you hear how insane that sounds?" "No, Brian," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm throwing you out because you refuse to respect me, my house, or the fact that I've been supporting all of you without asking for a single thing in return. And I'm done being treated like the bad guy for having boundaries." For a moment, no one said anything. Anna's face was red with anger. Brian looked like he wanted to punch something, and my mom had just walked into the room, her face pale and her eyes wide. "Alex," she started, but I held up a hand to stop her. "Mom, don't. I've made my decision. Brian and Anna are leaving tomorrow, and if you can't respect that, you're welcome to go with them." She gasped like I'd slapped her. "You don't mean that." "I do," I said quietly. "I've been over backward for this family, and all I've gotten in return is disrespect and entitlement. I'm done." I turned and walked upstairs to my office, slamming the door behind me. My hands were shaking and my chest felt tight, but I knew I'd done the right thing. For the rest of the day, the house was dead silent. No one came to my door, no one tried to talk to me. I stayed locked in my office, working, eating my lunch at my desk, and trying to distract myself from the anxiety gnawing at my stomach. That evening, As I was getting ready for bed, there was a soft knock at my door. I opened it to find my dad, Mike, standing there. He looked tired, older somehow, like the past few weeks had aged him. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. I nodded and stepped aside. He sat down in the chair across from my desk, folding his hands in his lap. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. Then he looked up at me. "You're right, Alex," he said finally. "This isn't fair to you. We've let this go too far, and it's not okay." I felt a lump rise in my throat, but I swallowed it down. "Then why did you let it happen, Dad? Why didn't you say something when this all started?" He sighed deeply, his shoulders slumping. "Because your mother was so determined to make things easier for Brian, and I didn't want to upset her. I thought things would settle down on their own." "They didn't," I said flatly. "No," he admitted, "and now it's a mess. But Alex, I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. I know it wasn't easy." I looked away, blinking back the sting of tears. It wasn't the validation I wanted, but it was something. "I'll talk to them," he said, standing up. "I'll make sure they understand that they need to leave tomorrow." "Thanks, Dad," I said quietly. He nodded and walked out, closing the door behind him. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. I felt drained, like I'd run a marathon and still had miles to go. But for the first time in weeks, I also felt something else, a faint sense of relief. Because one way or another, this was finally coming to an end. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The house was quiet, eerily so. Normally, by this time, I'd hear Anna fussing over something in the kitchen or Brian stomping around the hallway. But today, silence. For a brief moment, I let myself hope that maybe they'd taken my words seriously, packed up, and left in the middle of the night. I threw on a hoodie and made my way downstairs. The crib was still in the middle of the living room, its pastel-colored mobile gently spinning from the draft of the ceiling fan. Boxes of baby supplies were stacked against the wall, and Anna's oversized purse sat on the couch like she'd just stepped out for a moment. They hadn't gone anywhere. In the kitchen, my mom was sitting at the table, clutching her coffee mug like it was the only thing anchoring her to reality. Her eyes were red, and I could tell she'd been crying. My dad was next to her, silent, staring at the floor. "Morning," I said flatly, grabbing a glass from the cabinet and filling it with water. "Alex," my mom said softly, her voice trembling, "do we really have to do this? Can't we find another way?" I set my glass down and turned to face her. "We've already tried every other way, Mom. I've set boundaries. I've been more than patient. And every single time, they've ignored me and pushed further. This isn't up for discussion anymore." She nodded weakly, her shoulders slumping in defeat. My dad didn't say a word, but he gave me a small nod, like he was silently backing me up. I grabbed my keys and headed out the door without another word. I needed to clear my head, and sitting in that suffocating house wasn't going to do it. When I came back a couple of hours later, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Brian was in the living room, sitting on the couch with his arms crossed and a scowl etched across his face. Anna was beside him, her face blotchy from crying, clutching a throw pillow like it was some kind of emotional support device. "Are you serious about this, Alex?" Brian said as soon as I walked in. "You're actually kicking us out? Your own brother? Your pregnant sister-in-law?" I dropped my keys on the counter and sighed. "Brian, we've been over this. You've disrespected me, my space, and my generosity at every turn. I've given you multiple chances to course correct, and instead, you doubled down. I'm done." Anna let out a sharp laugh, one that had no humor in it. "You're unbelievable. Do you even hear yourself? We're family, Alex. Family. You're supposed to help us, not throw us out on the street like we're strangers." "No, Anna," I said, walking into the living room and standing in front of them. "I'm not supposed to let you walk all over me just because we share blood. Being family doesn't mean I have to let you take advantage of me. And that's exactly what you've done. From the moment you walked in here with your suitcases and acted like this house was yours." Anna's lip trembled, and she turned away, clutching the pillow tighter. Brian, however, wasn't done. He stood up, squaring his shoulders and towering over me slightly. "You know what, Alex? You're selfish. You're cold. You've always had everything handed to you, and now you can't even make a small sacrifice for your own family. That made me laugh. An actual, bitter laugh. Everything handed to me? Are you serious right now? I worked my ass off to afford this house, Brian. I worked overtime, weekends, and late nights to get here. Meanwhile, you've spent most of your adult life hopping between jobs, living off handouts, and blaming everyone else for your failures. Don't stand there and tell me I had it easy. He opened his mouth to respond but seemed to think better of it. Instead, he just shook his head and sat back down, his knee bouncing anxiously. At that moment, my mom appeared in the doorway, her face pale and her eyes darting between us. Brian. Anna. It's time to start packing. Anna gasped like she'd been struck. You're siding with him? My mom's voice cracked. This isn't about sides. This is about respect. And Alex is right. You've crossed too many lines. We can't keep doing this. For the first time, Brian looked genuinely stunned. He stared at our mom like she was a stranger, like he couldn't believe she wasn't rushing to defend him. Anna turned away entirely, her face buried in her hands as she started to cry again. Without saying another word, I walked past them and into my office, shutting the door behind me. I needed space. The rest of the day passed in a weird haze. I could hear the sound of boxes being shuffled around, suitcases being zipped, and Anna's muffled sobs from down the hall. My mom tried to keep things calm, speaking softly and gently, while my dad quietly helped them pack without getting involved in the arguments. Around dinner time, I heard Brian's voice rise from the hallway. This is ridiculous, Anna. We're leaving, okay? Let's just get out of here. She didn't respond, or if she did, I didn't hear it. By the time night fell, their suitcases were stacked by the front door. Brian sat on one of them, scrolling through his phone, while Anna sat next to him with her arms wrapped tightly around her belly. They didn't say a word when I walked past them to grab a glass of water. The next morning, they were gone. When I came downstairs, the living room was empty. The crib, the baby supplies, the endless clutter. They were all gone. The house felt hollow, like it was exhaling after holding its breath for weeks. My mom was sitting at the dining table again, her coffee mug in front of her. She didn't look up when I walked in, but she spoke quietly. They're staying at a motel for now. Brian said they'd look for an apartment soon. I nodded, pouring myself a cup of coffee. Neither of us said anything else. For the first time in what felt like months, I sat in my living room, with a cup of coffee in hand and no tension hanging in the air. The silence wasn't oppressive anymore. It was peaceful. Later that afternoon, my dad knocked on my office door. Alex, your mom and we've been talking. We know things can't keep going like they have been. We're going to start looking for a smaller place for ourselves. We don't want to put you through this again. I felt something heavy lift off my chest. Thank you, Dad. I appreciate that. He nodded and gave my shoulder a pat before leaving the room. That night, I made dinner for myself, a proper dinner, not just eggs or toast. I sat at the dining table alone, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. The house was finally mine again. And even though I knew things with my family wouldn't magically be perfect now, at least the boundaries had been drawn. And this time, they were going to stay that way. The days following Brian and Anna's departure felt surreal. The house was quiet, almost too quiet, but it was a relief, a heavy weight lifted off my chest. For the first time in months, I could move around my own home without bracing myself for an argument, a passive-aggressive comment, or the sight of someone treating my living room like a nursery. My parents kept mostly to themselves. My dad spent hours in the backyard, pretending to fix things that didn't need fixing, while my mom lingered around the kitchen, moving dishes from one cabinet to another without any real purpose. It was like they didn't know what to do with themselves now that the chaos had settled. One evening, about a week after Brian and Anna left, my mom knocked softly on my office door. When I opened it, she looked smaller somehow, like she'd shrunk under the weight of everything that had happened. She was holding a cup of tea, which she handed to me as she stepped inside. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded and sat down on the couch across from her. She lowered herself into the armchair and stared at her hands, her fingers twisting around each other. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," she started, her voice trembling slightly, "about how we handled this, about how we treated you." And I need to apologize. I didn't say anything. I just let her speak. We shouldn't have let it get that far. I shouldn't have let Brian and Anna push you the way they did. And I certainly shouldn't have taken their side over yours in your own home. You were right, Alex. You were right about all of it. Hearing her say those words I never thought I'd hear, stirred something in me. I wasn't angry anymore, just tired. I don't hate Brian or Anna, I said after a moment. I wanted to help them. I really did. But they took advantage of that, and instead of backing me up, you and Dad let them. Her eyes filled with tears, and she nodded slowly. I know. And your father knows it too. We let our guilt over Brian's failures cloud our judgment. He's always struggled, Alex. He's always needed more from us. But that doesn't mean it was fair to ask you to carry that burden. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. I don't mind helping, Mom. But there's a difference between helping someone and letting them walk all over you. And you guys let them walk all over me. She didn't try to argue or justify anything. She just nodded again, wiping at her eyes with trembling fingers. We're going to start looking for a smaller place, she said softly. Somewhere nearby, but not here. You deserve to have your space back, your peace back. And we need to start being more independent too. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. A part of me felt guilty, like I'd somehow failed them by pushing them out. But the bigger part of me knew this was the right choice. This was the only choice. Thank you, Mom, I said quietly. She stood up, hesitated for a moment, then leaned down and hugged me tightly. It wasn't a long hug, and it wasn't one of those tearful movie moment embraces, but it was genuine, and it felt like a step in the right direction. Over the next few weeks, things started to change. My parents began actively looking for a small rental apartment nearby. I helped them browse listings online and even went with them to check out a couple of places. It wasn't easy. My mom cried after almost every viewing, and my dad stayed quiet and distant, clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation. But progress was progress. Brian, on the other hand, was a different story. He hadn't spoken to me since the day he and Anna left. I wasn't surprised. If I knew anything about my brother, it was that he hated being held accountable for his actions. My mom mentioned that they were staying in a cheap motel and that Anna was miserable. Part of me felt bad for her. Pregnancy is hard enough without being stuck in a cramped motel room. But another part of me reminded myself that they'd put themselves in that position. About a month after they left, I got a text from Brian out of the blue. It was short and blunt. Can we talk? I stared at my phone for a long time before replying, sure. Come by tomorrow. When he showed up the next day, he was alone. No Anna, no baby supplies, just Brian standing on my porch with his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. He looked worn out, tired. I let him in, and we sat in the living room, the same living room where that stupid crib had been set up not so long ago. For a few minutes, neither of us said anything. Then Brian sighed and rubbed his face with both hands. I messed up, Alex. I didn't respond. I just let him talk. I don't know why I acted the way I did. Anna and we were scared. The baby's coming, and everything feels like it's falling apart. But that doesn't excuse what we did. We should have been grateful for what you were already doing for us, not demanding more. I nodded slowly. You should have. I'm not asking you to forgive me right away, he continued, his voice cracking slightly. But I wanted to say I'm sorry. And thank you for everything you did. Even if we didn't appreciate it at the time. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was something. And from Brian, it was more than I'd ever expected. I appreciate that, Brian, I said honestly. But you have to understand, I'm not going to let that happen again. If you and Anna ever need help in the future, I'll do what I can. But there will be boundaries. And you're going to have to respect them. He nodded, looking down at his hands. I get it. I do. We sat there for a little while longer, talking about small things, work, life, the baby. When he left, I felt lighter, like a wound had finally started to scab over. A few weeks later, my parents moved into a small apartment about 15 minutes away. My mom cried on moving day, but she hugged me tightly and told me she was proud of me. My dad shook my hand, which felt strangely formal, but I could see in his eyes that he meant it. The house felt different after they left. Quieter, but not in a bad way. Peaceful. I reclaimed my space, redecorated my office, and even hosted a few friends over for dinner, a luxury I hadn't been able to enjoy in months. Brian and Anna eventually found a small rental of their own. Anna had the baby, a little girl, and my mom sent me pictures. I haven't visited them yet, but I'll get there. It's strange how quickly things can fall apart, and how slowly they can be pieced back together. But if there's one thing I learned from all of this, it's that boundaries aren't selfish, they're necessary. And sometimes, standing up for yourself isn't about pushing others away. It's about making space for the respect you deserve.